This is Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
I'm the only lawyer ever to obtain a court ruling that a president of the United States committed a crime.
For truth. For competition.
As a young lawyer, I helped break up AT&T. That's why you have all your cell phones today.
For sovereignty. For the Republic.
I'm the guy who, at Judicial Watch, which I founded, uncovered the Chinagate scandal. Millions of dollars going to the Clinton campaign, corrupting our political system.
For the privacy of citizens.
And I'm the only guy to have enjoined the National Security Agency from mass surveillance on hundreds of millions of Americans.
Tearing it up.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
Bringing it back.
We're going to take this country apart and put it back together again in the way envisioned by our founding fathers.
It's not just talk.
We're not just regurgitating news stories. Larry Klayman, special prosecutor, is making the news.
And now, here's Larry.
Welcome to this week's edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. Another very important show. Many things have been going on, but of course the thing that is most in everybody's mind is the murder, and I say murder because that's what it was, of Jeffrey Epstein, a pedophile, a perverted individual who palled around with Bill Clinton, with others in his private jet. He had a fantasy island, amassed tremendous wealth. No one knows to this day how he got that wealthy. You can only assume that he had some kind of mafia connection, which brings us, of course, to the Clintons. During the Clinton years, as you know, after I founded and ran Judicial Watch for 10 years in the late 1990s, early 2000s, I deposed a number of people in and around the Clintons, many of whom were mafia. And we know that during that period of the Clintons' reign of terror in the White House, that over 80 people died, mysteriously. Not really actually mysteriously, that's being polite. They died. Vince Foster, for instance, the last male paramour of Hillary Clinton, the person who was deputy White House counsel, former partner of Hillary Clinton at the Rose Law Firm. He had his office right next to Hillary Clinton's in the White House. He would even water Hillary's plants when she would be out of town. That was the testimony of Linda Tripp, who worked with Vince Foster. He was in on the Filegate scandal, the scandal where the Clintons got over 900 FBI files of adversaries and people even in the Democratic Party, such as Carville themselves, basically to keep them under control, to blackmail them if necessary. It was the prelude to the misuse of the NSA under Bush and under Obama. This was a very important event because Vince Foster died in a park, Fort Marcy Park. Many people thought it was murder. Others thought it was suicide. But it was never adequately investigated. It was swept under the carpet by then independent counsel Ken Starr. We're going to talk about him in a little bit. But Foster had the goods on Hillary Clinton. Foster, according to Linda Tripp, was the only person in the Clinton White House who had any degree of ethics. And shortly before he died, he gave a speech at Harvard which said, "Your reputation is everything. When you lose your reputation, you lose it all." Now, he was doing work for Clintons to hide income with regard to the Internal Revenue Service. He was in on Filegate, gathering those files. He was doing a number of other things, and he did it, I believe, because he was in love with Hillary Clinton. If you can believe that anybody could possibly be in love with her, it's hard to believe. But apparently he was, and he was her love slave in a way. He knew too much. And when he died, he left in the safe an envelope. That envelope went missing. So did the FBI files. And we later found out much of this found its way into the White House living quarters, which Hillary refused to, in fact, identify when it came to the investigations that I was conducting at Judicial Watch, the cases, Ken Starr's investigations, independent counsel, Congress, etc. So there's one person among 80. There was a good reason to kill, because he was about ready to spill the beans. That's what that letter most likely was about. He couldn't take it anymore. Then there was Jim McDougal, who was the banker involved in the Whitewater scandal. He was indicted, he was arrested, he was incarcerated in Little Rock, Arkansas. He was about ready to testify to independent counsel Ken Starr, and he died in his jail cell. Sound familiar? That's what happened to Jeffrey Epstein. There were 80 other people who died in and around the Clinton administration, most of them material witnesses who would have talked and given evidence with regard to the myriad of Clinton's crimes. I'm talking about both of them, Bill and Hillary Clinton, the Bonnie Clyde of American politics. These people also perished. And if the Clintons would deny that they were responsible for any of these murders or deaths, that was belied by the fact that on the chair of Linda Tripp, when she was squealing or about to squeal on Bill Clinton and what was going on with Monica Lewinsky and other things, a list of the 80 dead people were left on her White House chair. Not only that, 2 whistleblowers who came forward to Judicial Watch at the time that all this was going on, who revealed that there were millions of emails that were not produced to Judicial Watch, the independent counsel Ken Starr, later Robert Ray, who took over for Ken Starr, and then, of course, Congress. These people also had lists of the 80 dead people left on their chairs. So if the Clintons did not kill people, they certainly wanted these witnesses to think that they could get killed, to keep them quiet. And of course, now we turn fast forward many years to the death of Jeffrey Epstein, which no one believes was a suicide. Look, I've been in many prisons in my life, not as a prisoner, but representing clients. And there's better security for minimum security type prisoners than was the case for Epstein. To the extent that Bureau of Prison Guards weren't there, it's because they likely were paid off, and this was likely a mafia hit. Now, who are the prime suspects? The prime suspects, again, are Bill and Hillary Clinton, the Bonnie and Clyde of American politics. Because, you see, this is the kind of thing that they specialize in. People dying, people not being able to testify. And this, of course, is what gave rise to many of these deaths during the Clinton years. Now, one of the things that I want you to really bear in on and understand is that you can work with the mafia. Obviously, Bill and Hillary Clinton didn't go into the prison and kill them with their bare hands. This was a hit. And I took the depositions of people who had mafia connections. I'm not saying that he is involved, but Harold Ickes, deputy White House counsel, I asked him about his mafia connections. He got up, threw the microphone down on the table, walked out, said he was going to defecate on my floor. And I'm not saying that he did it. But yes, the Clintons do have mafia connections. In fact, most presidents do. Richard Nixon did, others did. So it's easy if you want to do a hit. Now, Clinton had taken 23 trips on a plane with Jeffrey Epstein. It's known that he frequented underage young girls. It's beyond a doubt that he participated in sexual abuse towards them. And obviously, it's not just Clinton whose head is on the line. Of course, Hillary still wants to protect her husband, whatever their relationship, because this bears on her, on what she did. During the Clinton years, I represented many of the Clinton women who were harassed and threatened. They got IRS audits. Their kids were threatened by private investigators. And she was the one who ran the war room with George Stephanopoulos and James Carville to do that. In fact, we wound up suing them. Jennifer Flowers, my client, sued them at the time. Her house was broken into. She was threatened. Other women were threatened. So all of this is extremely believable. So when the president retweeted that the Clintons are prime suspects, he was absolutely right. And he gets vilified for that. This needs to be investigated with regard to the Clintons and anybody else that may be involved. Because, see, Epstein got his money most likely through mafia connections. The mafia, the Dons, and the other so-called leaders, they don't want it out in terms of what he knew, how he could turn state's evidence to try to get a lesser sentence since he had been indicted. And, of course, we have others weighing in on this scandal now, too. We have Ken Starr, ironically, who took a dive on the Vince Foster death. Someone who lost his job as president of Baylor University because he covered up a sexual scandal there. The other day, in an interview with Newsmax, he said, in fact, his law firm had helped negotiate the sweetheart plea deal of Jeffrey Epstein in the Southern District of Florida, and that the victims' rights were protected. Well, they weren't protected. And then Ken Starr, believe it or not, says that he thinks that Jeffrey Epstein may have been murdered. At least he was honest in that respect. But you see, this is what we've got in Washington, D.C. We've got people like Ken Starr, part of the establishment, who took a dive with Clinton, never took him out through impeachment or through indicting him at the time, someone who apologized to the Clintons after the fact. And he's part of this club. He calls Attorney General Bill Barr Bill. He calls James Comey Jim. This is the club. And, of course, then we have Bill Barr, who, after Epstein's death, assigns the Bureau of Prisons and the Inspector General to conduct an investigation. That's like asking the fox to investigate the hen house. The Bureau of Prisons is corrupt, and so is the Justice Department. We know that. And just a week or so ago, Attorney General Bill Barr took a dive. He decided that he wasn't going to indict Comey. He was giving that back as an offering to the Democrats because they've threatened to have him impeached and have him held in criminal contempt over the alleged obstruction of justice by President Trump, which they claim he covered up. This is Washington, and this is why you need a Freedom Watch. You need to donate to our cause, freedomwatchusa.org, because we have started an investigation into the Epstein murder. We're using Freedom of Information Act requests. We're using private investigators. We'll use whistleblowers who will come forward. Obviously, there's a great risk at this, and we need your strong financial support. Of course, no sooner than I announced this investigation, Tom Fitton, who's not a lawyer of Judicial Watch, announces that they're doing one too. You know, I have to laugh a little bit because they track me so much. I mean, it's like I'm being stalked and trolled all these years. Every time I have a hearing, just a few weeks ago when I was in court for Sheriff Joe Arpaio, there were two of Fitton's stooges sitting there in the back. One of them actually looks like Goofy, you know, in the Walt Disney movies, a kid I hired years ago. And, you know, love the one you're with, okay? Do whatever you're told. But these people are out there, and they track what Freedom Watch does and what I do, and I'm flattered by it, but we're the real deal. Fitton gets documents. Okay, good. Get documents. Hang them on the wall, like I said, with pictures of yourself in tight shirts. For whatever reason, you're advertising your physique on the Internet, you can ask him. But it's extremely strange. I don't bother doing that. I'd rather actually file hard-hitting cases, bring lawsuits in citizens' grand juries. So we're going to get to the bottom of this, and we're going to hold people accountable. We need your strong support. Go to freedomwatchusa.org. Read the column that I've written today, which will be up on WND.com and on freedomwatchusa.org. And please donate to our cause, tax-deductible contributions. We need it. We need to get bigger. I'll be right back with the second segment of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman.
Fearless.
He's claiming he's crazy, he's racist, he's out to kill the Democrats.
Dangerous.
I don't care. He uses the court and the law.
Lethal.
This is bad.
Special Prosecutor
Very bad.
Larry Klayman.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
I'm back with the second segment of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. Other big news this week. Finally, Prime Minister Netanyahu, Benjamin Netanyahu, yes, the Benjamins, that's what Ilham Omar uses to refer to Jews, not just Netanyahu, but all Jews. We're the Benjamins. And then, of course, by extension, Christians. I'm a Jewish Christian, as you know. And got the other radical Muslim up on Capitol Hill, Rashida Tlaib, who says the Holocaust, of course, gives her a calming feeling. Initially, Netanyahu and Israel said they were going to let them into the country next week for a visit. Now, what would that visit have entailed? Going, of course, to visit the PLO, going to visit representatives of Hamas, going on the West Bank, fomenting violence. These two congressmen, one from Minnesota, Omar, the other one from Detroit, Michigan, Tlaib, they have connections to groups that fund terrorism, CARE, other groups. They have connections to actual terrorists. In fact, I would say that they qualify as terrorists, frankly, because if somebody who supports them and supports their goals is furthering terrorism. But Israel initially, didn't have the guts, and they said, okay, we'll let them into the country, even though Israel has a law that says you're not to be permitted into the country if you are backing a boycott of Israel, which is intended to destroy Israel financially. And therefore, because if you cut off the funds, you're going to destroy Israel generally, and the wealth of Iran and the other enemies of Israel could then destroy the Jewish and Christian nation. Yes, it is a Jewish and Christian nation. That's because Jesus, of course, came from Israel, and Jesus was a rabbi. So it belongs to both of our peoples, which is one people, in my view. Well, this week, the president tweeted out something which said that there should be courage on behalf of the Israelis and not to allow them into the country. He's been vilified. He continues to be vilified over that. The left has got their panties in a knot right now. And who controls the left primarily? And I got to say this, and I say this as a Jew. okay? It's the Jewish left. They're not just an embarrassment to the Jewish people. They're not just the people who invented communism through Marx and Trotsky and Saul Alinsky later on, in terms of American ultra-leftists. George Soros, somebody who sold out his own people with his father, confiscating the property of Jews on their ways to the gas chambers. But the Jewish left, not everybody, there are good people in the Jewish left, but there's a lot of them on the Jewish left who are the biggest threat to Israel and to Jews and Christians. And frankly, as someone with Jewish heritage, I can hold them accountable. I can say these things, just like valiant African Americans, like my client Demetric Penny can say that about Black Lives Matter and say that about the new Black Panther Party and Farrakhan and Sharpton and Jesse Jackson, Obama, and others. In fact, I brought a lawsuit for him this week in my private capacity against the Dallas Morning News. You can see that at larryclayman.com, my law firm's website. But the president did exactly the right thing. And, Netanyahu, people think is this tough guy. He's not a tough guy. Netanyahu, frankly, talks a good game, talks loud, but carries a very small stick. And it was the president that got him to do the right thing and to prevent these two terrorist supporters, Omar and Tlaib, from going to Israel. They have no business there. They would have incited violence. There would have been people dying. And it was exactly the right thing. Now, that comes to my client, Laura Loomer, who's had the courage to stand up to both of them. And in fact, has a lawsuit against Facebook, which I brought, which you can find at larryclayman.com. And also there's a case by Freedom Watch, which regard to antitrust violations for excluding her from various media networks, social media networks, along with yours truly and other conservatives, is that she had the courage to stand up to them and is continuing to stand up to them. And I want you to watch, not just what she's done in the past. You can go to her websites and see it. You can go to ours. And we brought a lawsuit recently, like I said, against Facebook for calling her dangerous. She's not dangerous. I'll tell you who's dangerous is Tlaib and Omar. They're dangerous. But she's going to be bringing a lawsuit in the next few days against Rashida Tlaib, who assaulted her physically in Michigan. There's a video of that. And this is why you could not allow this vile human being, this radical Muslim, this person who literally hates and foams at the mouth, not just over Israel, but over Christians and Jews in general, along with Omar, who's now having an illicit affair with somebody who worked on her campaign, while at the same time being married to somebody else, and who knows what else she's married to. These people need to be held accountable. So I commend Israel, finally, for keeping these people out of their country, and I commend President Trump for doing the right thing and taking the heat. And that's what I love about President Trump. He does what's right. He knows that we don't have a legal system anymore that works. And he does what he can. I'm going to be right back with former Congressman Bob BARR and former U.S. Attorney Bob BARR to talk about various legal issues that are pending.
And now, 4 words that make corrupt politicians make wee-wee in their little pants.
Transparency and the rule of law will be the touchstones of this presidency.
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Special Prosecutor Larry Clayman.
Be the one who makes our country great again. Go to freedomwatchusa.org and donate.
I'm back with my good friend, my colleague, an American patriot, Bob BARR, former congressman from Georgia, former U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, someone I worked with. He did most of the heavy lifting, but I helped to impeach President Bill Clinton back in the 1990s. And of course, he is an expert on the Justice Department. He was part of it like I was. And he's also a civil libertarian like yours truly, in addition to having conservative leanings and other types of predilections, okay, to say the least. I want to get his take because I talked about this last week about what I considered to be, and I'm usually very complimentary of the president, but he made a mistake here. I believe that he overreacted to the tragedies in Ohio and in Texas and proposed stricter gun control. I frankly think we need more guns and not less to protect ourselves from these maniacs. He proposed giving greater powers to the social media companies to spy on us and then to determine who's, in their view, mentally imbalanced or insane, and turning that over to the government. And last but not least, other measures to curtail our civil liberties. Bob, I want to get your take on this because you are a civil libertarian, and in fact, you ran on the Libertarian Party for president, as a matter of fact. So what did you think about what the president said after those massacres?
As a lot of people do, even with good intentions, of saying, yes, we need to do something in the wake of a great tragedy. But he then went on to propose, at least initially and in general terms, matters and proposals that have not worked in the past, are not going to work, and in fact may make matters worse, in addition to doing damage to the Constitution, particularly not just the Second Amendment, Larry, but as you know, these proposals for so-called red flag laws and other steps to prevent people from acquiring firearms run counter not only to the Second Amendment, but in some ways the Fourth Amendment, the 14th Amendment, the Fifth Amendment. So these are very serious matters that require far more deliberation than apparently a lot of people in Washington are giving to them.
One of the things that scares me, and of course, at Freedom Watch, I enjoined preliminarily the National Security Agency under Obama twice, gave rise to the USA Freedom Act, this mass surveillance on the American people without probable cause that a crime was being committed or there was communication with terrorists. And now we're giving to the social media companies, according to this suggestion by the president. I hope he was just doing a rope-a-dope and trying to relieve some pressure from him, because he was under a lot of pressure at the time. People were calling him a racist and blaming him. You can understand his reaction. But that to me is scarier, because there's no control over these social media companies. They're run by ultra-leftists. And people like you and me could wind up on some list, and put away for life, like in the Soviet Gulag, because we're not mentally stable, according to the leftists who run these social media companies. And of course, people inside of government, the deep state, which still continues to be pro-Democrat, pro-leftist. So to me, it's just simply frightening, Bob. And the technology, I know, which the National Security Agency has, and the CIA and the FBI, where did they get that technology? They got it from the same techies out in Silicon Valley that gave the same technology to the social media companies. I mean, look at your cell phone. They know where you are at every moment. Look at Uber. They can tell where you are within a few feet of where you're located. The government and these social media companies and providers of cable and satellite TV can turn your TV on and watch you. Look at the devices that you can have in your house, Alexis, that can listen to you. In fact, it's been proven that they do listen to you sometimes. People that work for these companies like Google that are just curious in what's going on. And they spy on their girlfriends and boyfriends and husbands and wives. That's been shown in an Inspector General's report with regard to the NSA. So to me, this is frightening, Bob. And, go on.
It's not only frightening because of the scenario, Larry, that you've laid out in terms of what goes on domestically here in the United States with the unholy alliance between these tech companies and government agencies, but these are the same tech companies that are working with entities overseas, such as the Chinese People's Army, the Chinese government, and so forth. We have Nancy Pelosi going off the rails and calling Mitch McConnell Moscow Mitch, which is outrageous in and of itself. But these Democrats in the Congress, they have this cozy relationship with these tech companies and social media companies that are in turn in bed with the very governments overseas that the Democrats are criticizing the Republicans for being too close to.
You're right, Bob. By the way, if Mitch McConnell, who I generally don't like, is called Moscow Mitch, then what is Bernie Sanders? Moscow snitch? I mean, he was married in Moscow a long time ago. I'm sure he would have preferred to live there than here. But in any event, you're absolutely right. And let's shift a little bit the discussion topic, because we talked about this earlier in the week, how the Democrats are trying to pack the Supreme Court, which, of course, gives rise to the potential for a lot of rulings that will destroy our civil liberties and destroy our rights under the Bill of Rights in our Constitution.
It's truly frightening, Larry. As a student of the Constitution and constitutional history, you're very familiar with the court packing proposal that President Franklin Roosevelt tried in the late 1930s. He wasn't getting the rulings that he wanted out of the Supreme Court, so he floated the idea very publicly to put additional justices on the Supreme Court for every justice that reached a certain age. I think it may have been 72, and who didn't retire. I mean, it sounds ridiculous on its face, but he was absolutely serious about this court packing proposal. And even though he was not able eventually to get the legislation through, the damage was done. He scared some of the Supreme Court justices at the time and caused some of them to make 180-degree reversals on earlier decisions. And now what we have is Senator Whitehouse and I think 4 or 5 other very liberal Democratic senators just filed an amicus, or a friend of the court brief, with the Supreme Court in a case that the court is under consideration involving the New York Rifle and Pistol Club. And what Senator Whitehouse is proposing is to, I think he used the word, restructure the court. The very clear threat is that because the court has become somewhat more conservative in this senator's views, and because Justices Gorsuch and Kavanaugh are now on there, and because the NRA and other Second Amendment supportive groups wrote articles and lobbied, in a sense, for President Trump's nominees to be confirmed, these senators now say, "Oh, that is a politicization of the court, and we need to now consider restructuring the court." It's court packing what they're talking about here, and Lord help us if they were able to get control of the Senate and the White House next year.
That's right, Bob. Of course, there's nothing in the Constitution which talks about how many Supreme Court justices there should be. So that could be legislated. So if President Trump loses and we have one of these lunatics on the left as president, and if the Senate turns over, we could wind up with enough justices basically to wipe out any positive impact, assuming there is any, of Justice Kavanaugh. I'm not sure in his case there is that much, but certainly Gorsuch, is a true conservative.
I worry about both of them as well to some extent, but the Democrats, particularly in the Senate, are seething. Even after, what has it been, 4 or 5 years over the Merrick Garland matter, where the Senate under Republican control refused to confirm President Obama's pick for the Supreme Court. They're extremely mad about that. Then President Trump, when he was running for office, made it very clear that he was going to appoint from a list of so-called conservative judges for openings on the Supreme Court. They're still extremely mad about that. And then, of course, we have Justices Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, which the Democrats hate with a passion. So, throw all of this together, it's a very toxic mixture of hate that the Democrats have for these people on the Supreme Court. And they will, in fact, I think, make this a campaign issue. And if they were to get the control of the government, they will change the size of the court almost certainly to restructure it, as they say.
Of course, this begs the issue, and you may or may not differ with me, Bob, but the Supreme Court these days, to me, is not the paradigm of intellectual honesty. And, they're politicians in robes. That's what they are on both sides. And they're not the be-all and end-all to bringing this country back to the vision of our founding fathers. That rests with we the people. So, pack the court one way or the other, but we still have a problem. And the problem is the American people themselves. And this is what I was saying earlier, is that, we've grown very complacent to Judeo-Christian values and ethics. John Adams said, without ethics, morality, and religion, there will be no lasting liberty. It won't matter how many times you've changed your rulers or your forms of government, or for that matter, packed the Supreme Court. And that's the problem with these tragedies, to come back to that. is that it's not an issue of guns. I mean, the reason I said we need more guns is because we need self-defense. And these leftists, whether it's in Ohio or whether just in the last few days in Philadelphia, I don't know if he's leftist, but the guy was a lunatic shooting all these cops. My brother was a cop there, by the way, so I know, and I'm from Philadelphia originally, is that, this is the breakdown of the country, and I'm fearful, and this is why we have our citizens' grand juries. Bob and you and I have talked about working on that together, and I hope that we do going forward, is that the American people need to rise up and do it for themselves. And I have gotten, and I'd like to get your take on this, I've gotten so fed up with watching cable news. I don't care if it's Fox News or CNN or MSNBC or CNBC or whatever. I turn it on just to get the news, and I turn it right off. And frankly, I flip on the golf channel, right? Because at least there's some purity. People who love the game, winning or losing, there's some reality to it. But I find what's going on in the country today to be like reality TV. And we need to do something. I want to get your take on this. We have about a minute and a half as to what the American people can be doing, because the government has failed them. The media has failed them. Everybody's failed them. And they failed themselves, frankly, because they haven't kept their own house in order. So we are at a crisis. What's your thought on how we can reverse this?
Well, I'm reminded in what you're saying not only of James Madison, John Adams, but also Thomas Jefferson. One of the pillars underpinning, or one of the foundational elements of a society and a civilization that would be protective of individual liberty, as our founders envisioned it, was and remains an educated citizenry. And we don't have that now. I share your same frustration with the news. I hardly ever watch it anymore because there's no news. What we have to do is people have to recapture their history, teach it to their kids, teach it to their fellow citizens, and remember and understand what our country was founded to be, because it has gotten so far off track, Larry, that I have to sort of slap myself every morning to not be pessimistic, to retain a sense of optimism. It's getting more and more difficult, though.
You're right, Bob. And, we need to basically sit down, you and I, because I don't mean to scratch ourselves on the backs, but we work really well together. We trust each other. We're old enough to know, the score, of how things have gone in the last several decades. And it's not enough just to get documents. And we got to come up with a plan here. We're working on the citizens' grand juries, hard-hitting cases, that kind of thing, doing whatever we can peacefully and legally to bring about justice. I thank you for what you've done in the past, Bob, and what you're doing now. And you're my good friend. I admire you. And I'm going to have you back, just not on this radio show, but for us to do things together. So thank you.
Before he was a trial lawyer, he sliced him and diced him.
People used to ask me, Larry, what caused you to start Judicial Watch and now Freedom Watch, given the powerful forces in this country that put you at risk?
In a meat packing plant.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
A very special prosecutor, Larry Klayman.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
The verdict, patriots, fellow Americans, people of faith, people who believe in the vision of our founding fathers. You heard it. I mean, we're at a crossroads. We have to do something. And I think you should get together, and Judicial Watch's, it's a Freudian slip because Freedom Watch does what Judicial Watch used to do when I ran it. Freedom Watch's Justice League. I want you to join that at freedomwatchusa.org. A few good men and women, Gideon's Army, can change the course of history just as we did in the days leading up to the revolution and the revolution itself. We are in a second American Revolution. The left has declared a revolution against us, we the people. And who knows that better than anyone? My client, Cliven Bundy. And this week, we're working on an appellate brief with regard to the supersedious indictment that was dismissed. She had to dismiss it, a very pro-Obama, appointed by Obama, confirmed by the U.S. Senate, controlled by the Democrats at the time, Judge Gloria Navarro. Even she dismissed the political prosecution, I should say persecution, of Cliven Bundy when we learned the government agencies were lying on the witness stand, that the prosecutors were lying, that exculpatory evidence was being withheld, and a whistleblower by the name of Larry Wooten came forward and said there was a kill list on the heads of the Bundys. This is just the half of it. Go to ClivenBundyDefenseFund.org, because who is pursuing this appeal of the dismissal? The Trump Justice Department. Now, what does this tell you? The Attorney General is in control of his own department. He's let the U.S. Attorney in Nevada that committed this gross prosecutorial misconduct take an appeal, causing Cliven to spend time and energy and uncertainty that if that dismissal of his indictment is overturned, along with the dismissal for his sons and the other defendants, he could be retried and put in prison for life if we do not win. And that is why we need your support. Go to ClivenBundyDefenseFund.org, ClivenBundyDefenseFund.org. Everything that's good about this country and everything that's bad about the country currently, in terms of the way it's administered in our justice system, is involved in the Bundy case. This case had such an impression on Hollywood, even in a different way, that Kevin Costner's show Yellowstone is patterned after Cliven Bundy. But the difference is that Kevin Costner's character, John Dutton, who owns this ranch like Bunkerville, but it's in Yellowstone, has a dark side and a good side. Cliven only has a good side. He's a man of faith. He stood up for you against a tyrannical federal government that wanted to take his land away from him and sell it under the table through Harry Reid and his corrupt son to Chinese environmental interests. Hundreds of ranchers have lost their ranch in the West. This is the American way of life. This land is our land. And the Bundys stood up to the, quote, law, unquote, because it wasn't the law. It was outlaws. And he won. And we cannot allow him to lose, and we must support him. Like we must support Dr. Jerome Corsi at CorsiLegalDefenseFund.org, who sued Robert Mueller, had the courage to do that for violating his constitutional rights and those of the president. Or our cases against social media, our antitrust case, where they're discriminating against conservatives and not allowing us to teach the American people proper Judeo-Christian values and ethics, such that these young millennials are going out and killing people with AK-15s. This is something that we need to really group together and fight. And like Bob, I get up every morning and I think what it is I can do, what it is that in my own way, with the grace of God, and God has come to me. Jesus came to me and said, Larry, you're working for me now. I don't know that I always do the right thing, but I seek his divine guidance. But I try to do the right thing, and I need your help to do it. So please go to freedomwatchusa.org, contribute to our cause, sign up to our Justice League, sign up for our various projects, go to ClivenBundyDefenseFund.org and contribute to his defense, because that's your defense. He's the last line of defense. It's Cliven's last stand, like Custer's last stand. But unlike Custer, we're going to win with your support. Or Corsi Legal Defense Fund, where he is taking on the powerful like Mueller. Attorney General Bill Barr won't do it. We saw the dive he took with regard to Comey. He's not going to proceed against Comey or anybody else that's part of the club. And this is why we, the people, need to do it for ourselves. I can't say that more and more and more. Share this radio show. Radio America allows me to say the truth. Get it out to your friends. So I'll be back next week with another edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. Until then, God bless you, God bless your family, God bless America, and God save America.